Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. When I turned 28, I thought moving in with Grant would be the perfect solution to my housing crisis. We'd grown up on the same block in Columbus, Ohio, spent summers building forts in his backyard, and even though we drifted apart during college, he reached out right when I needed a place after my divorce. His townhouse near German Village had a spare bedroom, the rent was reasonable, and honestly, I was just grateful to have somewhere stable while I got my life back together. I was working remotely as a data analyst, spending most days hunched over spreadsheets in my room, trying to rebuild my savings and figure out what came next. Grant worked nights at a pharmaceutical lab downtown, which meant we barely crossed paths except on weekends, and that seemed ideal for both of us. The first strange thing happened about 3 weeks after I moved in, on a Tuesday morning in early October. I woke up to find every single light in the house turned on: the living room, kitchen, hallway, even the basement I rarely went into. My laptop was open on the kitchen counter, logged into my work account with a half-written email to my supervisor about taking sick leave. The thing is, I distinctly remembered turning everything off before bed and leaving my laptop charging in my room. When Grant came home that morning, I mentioned it casually while making coffee, trying not to sound paranoid. He just looked at me with this concerned expression and said I'd been up around 3 in the morning, making noise in the kitchen, and he figured I couldn't sleep because of stress from the divorce. But I had no memory of getting up at all, and I've never been a sleepwalker, not once in my entire life. After that Tuesday, things started escalating in ways that made me question everything about myself. I'd find text messages on my phone that I supposedly sent to old college friends at weird hours, rambling messages about missing the old days, asking if they remembered specific parties or people I barely knew. The responses were always confused but polite, asking if I was okay, if I needed to talk to someone. My Amazon account showed orders for things I'd never buy: self-help books about memory loss, supplements for brain fog, even a voice recorder that arrived in a package I didn't remember opening. Grant would casually mention conversations we'd had that I couldn't recall, like how I'd agreed to pay for the internet this month or how I'd promised to clean the garage over the weekend. He never pushed it, just gave me these worried looks and suggested maybe I should see someone about the stress. The really unsettling part was the bills and official stuff that started showing up. I got a confirmation email for a dentist appointment I never scheduled, at a clinic 40 minutes away in Dublin. When I called to cancel, they said I'd specifically requested that time slot during a phone call the previous week, and even confirmed my insurance information. Then there was the credit card I supposedly applied for. The physical card arrived with a $2,000 limit already half used on purchases from stores I never shop at. The signature on the application looked like mine, but slightly wrong, like someone trying too hard to copy my handwriting. Grant found me staring at the statement one evening and put his hand on my shoulder, saying, maybe I should talk to my sister about staying with her for a while, that living alone with just him might be too isolating while I was dealing with post-divorce depression. By November, I was keeping a journal hidden in my car just to track what was real. Every morning before Grant got home from his night shift, I'd sit in my Honda Accord and write down everything I could remember from the previous day: what I ate, what work I completed, any conversations I had. It became my anchor to reality because inside that house, nothing made sense anymore. I discovered I'd apparently joined a gym across town and attended several sessions with a personal trainer named Keith, who knew my name and workout preferences. My Netflix history showed hours of documentaries about memory disorders watched between 2 and 5 in the morning. My work supervisor called me into a video meeting, concerned about the erratic emails I'd been sending after hours. Messages full of typos and strange tangents about feeling disconnected from reality. Grant started leaving post-it notes around the house with reminders about things I'd supposedly forgotten: doctor's appointments, promises to cook dinner, agreements to split utility bills differently. The breaking point came on a Saturday when I found my car parked differently in the driveway, the driver's seat adjusted for someone taller, and a parking receipt from downtown Columbus timestamped at 2:30 that morning. I hadn't left my room since 10 the night before. I even had my fitness tracker data to prove I'd been asleep. When I confronted Grant about it, really confronted him this time, he got this sad look on his face and pulled out his phone. He showed me security footage from our doorbell camera of me walking out to my car in the middle of the night, getting in, and driving away. The person in the video was wearing my clothes, had my build, moved like me, but I swear on everything I have left that I never got out of bed. Grant suggested maybe I should check myself into somewhere for observation, just for a few days, and he'd already researched some good facilities that took my insurance. That night, I pretended to take the sleeping pills Grant had thoughtfully picked up for me from his lab. He said they were samples that might help with my obvious insomnia issues. Instead, I palmed them and flushed them later, then lay in bed fighting to stay conscious while pretending to be knocked out. Around 1 in the morning, I heard my door creak open very slowly. Through barely cracked eyelids, I watched Grant enter my room with something in his hand. He stood there for what felt like forever, just watching me breathe before moving closer. I felt him lift my arm, felt something sharp prick my shoulder, and it took everything in me not to react. He stayed for another few minutes, occasionally saying my name softly, testing if I'd respond. After he left, I forced myself to wait another hour before getting up, my shoulder still stinging from whatever he'd injected me with. My head was already starting to feel foggy and disconnected, but I pushed through it and searched his room while he was at work the next night. In his closet, buried under old college textbooks, I found a box that changed everything. There were vials from his lab with my name written on them in his handwriting, syringes and detailed notes about dosages and times. But the worst part was the external hard drive full of videos, dozens of recordings of me doing things I didn't remember, all taken from hidden cameras throughout the house. In the videos, I moved slowly, mechanically, like a puppet being guided through routines. There was footage of me typing those emails, making those phone calls, even signing that credit card application while Grant stood behind me, coaching me through each action in a calm, steady voice. In one video from just 3 nights ago, he had me practicing his signature over and over on a notepad, telling me it was mine, that this was how I'd always signed my name. I grabbed the hard drive and the vials, stuffed them in my backpack along with some clothes, and got out of that house while Grant was still at work. My first instinct was to drive straight to the police station, but sitting in that parking lot at 4 in the morning, I realized how insane my story would sound. Here I was, a recently divorced guy with documented mental health concerns, work performance issues, and erratic behavior, claiming my childhood friend and roommate had been drugging me. Grant had been so careful to make me look unstable to everyone around us. My supervisor, my sister, even random medical professionals who now had files on my supposed memory problems. The security footage he'd shown me earlier was probably edited or staged somehow, but it would be his evidence against mine. I sat there in my car until sunrise trying to figure out who would believe me, which authorities to trust, how to prove something that had been designed from the start to make me look delusional. I ended up driving to my sister's place in Cincinnati, showing up at her door looking exactly like the mess Grant had been telling her I was. But I had the hard drive, I had the vials, and most importantly, I had enough clarity left to explain everything chronologically before whatever he'd been injecting me with completely scrambled my ability to think straight. She wanted to take me to the hospital immediately, but I convinced her to watch just one video first. The look on her face when she saw Grant positioning my unconscious body at the computer, when she heard him dictating the emails word by word while I typed them out like a zombie. That validation meant everything. We went to the police together that afternoon, and with the physical evidence, they finally took me seriously enough to investigate. They found more cameras when they searched the house, some in places I don't even want to think about, and Grant's lab confirmed that several restricted substances were missing from their inventory. Grant was arrested 2 days later at his lab, and the detective told me he didn't even try to deny it once they presented the evidence. He apparently told them it started as an experiment, just curiosity about suggestibility and memory formation using low doses of midazolam and other compounds from work. He said he picked me because I was vulnerable after the divorce, isolated, and he knew my history well enough to manipulate the gaps, the credit cards, the forged signatures. Those were just him taking advantage once he realized how completely he could control me during those drugged states. What haunts me most is that he kept detailed journals about my responses, like I was just another lab project, noting which drug combinations made me most compliant, which suggestions stuck better in my scrambled memory. The prosecutor said he'd been planning this since before he reached out about the room, that he'd specifically waited until my life was falling apart to make his move. It's been 6 months now since I got out, and I'm still recovering from whatever neurological damage those drugs caused. Some days I wake up genuinely unsure if my memories from the previous day are real, and I have to check my journal, check with my sister, check the date on my phone just to anchor myself. The therapy helps, but there are chunks of those 3 months living with Grant that are just gone forever. Things I did that I'll never remember, and other memories that feel real but might be completely fabricated from his suggestions. I'm sharing this because I need people to understand that the monster in your life doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it's the person who knows you best, who uses that knowledge to systematically destroy your grip on reality. Grant got 15 years, but I got a life sentence of never fully trusting my own mind again. If someone you love starts telling you that you're forgetting things, that you're not yourself lately, please get a second opinion before you start believing them. Portland, Maine in early spring can be brutal, especially when you're going through a breakup and the rain won't stop hammering against your apartment windows. I was teaching 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary, trying to keep it together in front of 22 kids who could smell weakness like sharks detecting blood in water. Nathan had moved out of our place on Free Street just 3 weeks earlier, taking his vinyl collection, but leaving behind that stupid expensive espresso machine neither of us knew how to properly clean. After 8 years of friendship and living just 2 blocks apart, Jessica became my lifeline during those dark days. She'd show up at my door with takeout from this hole-in-the-wall Thai place on Congress Street, the kind of friend who knew exactly when you needed company without having to ask. I was 28 and felt like my entire adult life was crumbling, but at least I had her. Jessica had this peculiar way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the world. She'd settle into my worn leather couch, tuck her auburn hair behind her ear, and focus on you with these intense hazel eyes that never seemed to blink enough. Every detail I shared about the breakup, she'd repeat back to me, making sure she understood it perfectly. "Hold on, Nathan actually said he'd been unhappy since January?" she'd clarify, pulling out her phone to type something quickly. She told me she was keeping notes in case I ever needed them for therapy or if things got ugly with dividing our stuff. Her dedication seemed excessive but touching, like she was assembling evidence to defend me in some future trial. She even started recording our conversations sometimes, saying her memory wasn't what it used to be, and she wanted to be the best support system possible. The first sign that something was wrong came about a month into this new routine, during a dinner party at our mutual friend Allison's house in Westbrook. I was telling the group about why Nathan and I had split, specifically about how he'd been secretly looking at apartments for weeks before telling me he wanted out. Mid-story, Jessica jumped in with this concerned expression, placing her hand on my arm gently. "Actually, honey, remember you told me it was months, not weeks, and that you'd suspected it all along?" she said in this soft, therapeutic voice. The table went quiet, and I felt my face burn with confusion. That wasn't what happened at all, but Jessica had said it with such confidence, such caring concern, that even I questioned my memory for a second. Allison exchanged a worried glance with her husband, and I saw something shift in how they looked at me, like I was suddenly fragile or unreliable. After that dinner, the corrections became more frequent and more public. At a birthday gathering for another teacher, I mentioned how Nathan had taken our cat, Mochi, even though we'd agreed I'd keep him. Jessica laughed softly and touched my shoulder, telling everyone how I must be mixing things up because of the stress, that I'd actually insisted Nathan take the cat because my apartment didn't allow pets. The thing is, my landlord loved cats and even had two of his own that roamed the building. But Jessica said it with such sympathy, such gentle correction, that people nodded along with these understanding smiles that made me want to scream. She'd then pull me aside privately and remind me that grief could affect memory, that it was totally normal to get confused about details when you're processing trauma. By May, my own parents started treating me differently when I'd visit them in Bangor for our monthly Sunday dinners. My mom would exchange these meaningful looks with my dad whenever I talked about work or friends, and she started prefacing conversations with, "How are you really feeling?" in that careful tone reserved for people on the edge of a breakdown. Finally, she admitted that Jessica had been calling them, expressing concern about my mental state. Apparently, Jessica had told them I'd been missing work frequently, crying in my classroom, and had even mentioned that I'd thrown a coffee mug at Nathan during an argument. None of it was true. I hadn't missed a single day of work, and the closest thing to violence in my relationship with Nathan was slamming a door once during our final fight. But Jessica had been so thoughtful, so worried, calling them weekly with updates and suggestions for therapists who specialized in adjustment disorders with aggressive tendencies. The most unsettling part was how Jessica would reference conversations we'd never had, always in front of other people. She'd bring up how I'd confessed to her about following Nathan to his new girlfriend's apartment, standing outside for hours in my car. When I'd pull her aside later, bewildered and angry, she'd show genuine confusion and even hurt. "You called me crying from outside her building on Bramhall Street," she'd insist, sometimes even pulling up call logs on her phone showing we'd talked that night, though I had no memory of it. She'd suggest that maybe I was dissociating, that trauma could cause blackouts, and offer to go with me to see someone professional. Her concern seemed so authentic that I started writing everything down in a journal, documenting my days just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. Things escalated when I ran into Nathan's sister, Claire, at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning in early June. She practically recoiled when she saw me, grabbing her daughter's hand and trying to hurry past the vegetable stands. When I called out to her, confused by the reaction since we'd always gotten along well, she turned around with this mixture of fear and pity in her eyes. "Jessica told us about the emails," she said quietly, glancing around like she was afraid I might cause a scene. "The hundreds of emails you've been sending Nathan, the threats about his new relationship. He's been too nice to get a restraining order, but Jessica convinced him to document everything." My legs felt weak standing there between the tomato vendors and flower stalls, because I hadn't sent Nathan a single email since we'd split. I didn't even have his new email address. But Claire looked at me with such genuine concern, mentioning specific dates and times, quotes from messages I'd supposedly sent about knowing where he worked now, about watching him. That afternoon, I drove straight to Jessica's apartment, my journal clutched in my passenger seat like evidence in my own defense. She opened the door already looking worried, as if she'd been expecting me. Her place always smelled like vanilla candles and fresh laundry, this comforting space where I'd spent countless evenings over the years. But now it felt different, like walking into a therapist's office where you're the subject of a case study. Before I could even speak, she guided me to her kitchen table, made me chamomile tea in my favorite mug she kept just for me, and pulled out her phone. "Claire called me, honey. She's concerned about you approaching them," Jessica said, scrolling through what looked like screenshots. She turned the phone toward me, and there they were, dozens of emails from my address to Nathan, filled with rambling, desperate messages I'd never written. The timestamps matched with evenings when I'd been alone at home, grading papers or watching Netflix. But the words were unhinged, obsessive, nothing like how I wrote or thought. That night, I went home and did something I should have done weeks earlier. I started checking everything systematically. First, my email sent folder, which showed none of the messages Jessica had on her phone. Then my phone call history, which was missing several of the calls Jessica claimed we'd had. But when I checked my phone bill online, those calls were there, clear as day, along with text messages I hadn't sent. My Facebook messages with mutual friends had conversations I didn't remember having, where I apparently admitted to following Nathan, to driving past his work, to being unable to control my anger. The messages were written in my style, used my common phrases, but described events that never happened. My digital footprint had been carefully edited, like someone had gone through and inserted a parallel version of me who was unstable, obsessive, dangerous. I sat on my bedroom floor with my laptop, printouts scattered around me, comparing my journal entries to these fabricated records, and realized that someone had been accessing my accounts. The revelation came when I remembered something from those early post-breakup evenings with Jessica. She'd offered to help me change all my passwords after the split, saying Nathan might have had access to them. We'd sat together on my couch, my laptop between us, as she helped me update everything. Email, social media, even my phone account. She'd suggested using a password manager app that she also used, saying we could share an emergency backup system where we each had access to the other's passwords in case something happened. It had seemed so practical, so caring at the time. I'd given her complete access to my digital life, and she'd been rewriting it ever since. The fake emails were sent and then deleted from my sent folder, but she kept screenshots. The phone calls were made using internet calling services that spoofed my number. She'd been constructing an alternate narrative of my life, one conversation, one message, one concerned phone call to my parents at a time. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday evening when I invited Jessica over under the pretense of needing support. I'd changed all my passwords that morning using a library computer, documented everything I could find, and even consulted with a lawyer friend who confirmed that what Jessica had done was criminal. Identity theft, harassment by proxy, defamation. When she arrived with Chinese food and that same sympathetic smile, I had everything laid out on my dining table like evidence in a courtroom. Her face went through a fascinating transformation as I explained what I'd discovered. First confusion, then hurt, then something else entirely. She didn't deny it. Instead, she sat down calmly, picked up one of the printouts, and said something that chilled me more than any horror movie ever could. "I was helping you," she said simply. "Nathan was wrong for you, but you couldn't see it. You needed everyone to understand why the relationship had to end, to see you as the victim you really were. I gave you that narrative. Now everyone supports you. Everyone's on your side. You're welcome." I told her to leave and never contact me again, threatened legal action if she didn't stop, but she just smiled this serene, almost maternal smile. "Who's going to believe you?" she asked, gathering her purse with unhurried movements. "I have months of documentation showing your mental instability. Your parents trust me to take care of you. Your friends think you're fragile. Even if you show them technical evidence, they'll think you're having a paranoid episode. I've been very thorough." She was right, and we both knew it. The next few weeks were hell as I tried to convince people of the truth, but Jessica had laid the groundwork too well. My parents suggested I take a leave of absence from teaching. Friends started declining my invitations. Even showing them my journal entries and the timestamp discrepancies just made them exchange those worried looks. I eventually moved to Burlington, Vermont, started fresh with a new job, new people who didn't know this manufactured version of me. I still check my accounts obsessively, still document everything, still wonder sometimes if I'm being paranoid, or if Jessica is somehow still out there, editing my life from a distance. The most terrifying part is that I'll never really know if every story about me, every perception people have, is actually mine or something she planted that grew roots too deep to ever fully extract. Last year in September, at 26 years old, I was running a gaming channel with my best friend Ethan that was finally taking off after 3 years of grinding. We'd just hit 100,000 subscribers, and sponsors were starting to reach out with actual money on the table. Every morning I'd wake up in my cramped apartment in Seattle, check the analytics while brewing coffee, and feel this electric excitement about what we were building together. Ethan and I had been friends since college, both film majors who dropped out junior year to chase the content creator dream. We split everything 50-50, filmed at my place because he lived with his parents, and I handled editing while he managed the business emails and social media. That Wednesday started like any other day, except I'd been dealing with a migraine since dawn and had already rescheduled 2 recording sessions that week. Around noon, Ethan showed up at my apartment with his camera bag and that expensive microphone he'd bought with his tax return, insisting we needed to film something because our upload schedule was slipping. I remember the way he kept adjusting his baseball cap, this nervous tic he had when he wanted something, and how he'd brought my favorite energy drink as a peace offering. The living room was a mess with cables everywhere, my monitors taking up half the dining table, and that stupid ring light we'd duct taped to a bookshelf because we couldn't afford a proper stand. He wanted to record a challenge video where we played horror games with increasingly ridiculous penalties, but my head felt like someone was drilling into my skull, and I kept having to pause between takes to close my eyes. The argument started small, just me asking if we could do something less intense, maybe a casual playthrough instead. But Ethan kept pushing, saying the algorithm loved our high-energy content and we couldn't afford to lose momentum now that we were finally growing. What happened next still plays in my mind like a broken record, every word crystal clear, even though I wish I could forget. Ethan started raising his voice, calling me lazy, saying I was sabotaging our success because I couldn't handle a little headache, and something inside me just snapped after years of accommodating his demands. I stood up too fast, knocking over the ring light, and told him he was a controlling narcissist who treated our partnership like his personal show where I was just the editing monkey in the background. The camera was still rolling on the tripod, red light blinking like an eye watching everything unfold, but neither of us thought to turn it off in the heat of the moment. I said things I'd been holding back for months, how he took credit for my ideas in live streams, how he'd respond to business emails without consulting me, how he'd schedule sponsorships around his availability without asking if I could meet deadlines. My voice got louder with each accusation, and I grabbed his microphone off the table, waving it around while ranting about how it cost more than my share of last month's revenue. Ethan's reaction was calculated in a way I didn't recognize until much later, when I rewatched the footage trying to understand what went wrong. He kept his voice steady and calm, almost therapeutic, repeatedly saying phrases like, "I hear you," and "let's talk about this rationally," while positioning himself perfectly in frame with his hands visible and non-threatening. When I threw the microphone onto the couch in frustration, he actually flinched and stepped back like I'd thrown it at him, even though he was standing 6 feet away near the window. He kept asking me to please calm down, and we can work through this in this wounded voice, occasionally glancing at the camera with these micro-expressions of fear that seemed so genuine in the moment. I didn't notice how he kept backing toward the door, creating distance between us, or how he subtly moved my gaming awards and breakable equipment out of the space between us like he was afraid I might throw them. The argument ended with me telling him to get out of my apartment and take his precious microphone with him, that I needed space to think about whether this partnership was even worth continuing anymore. Ethan gathered his equipment slowly, making a show of checking each piece like he was worried something might be damaged, and paused at the door to say he'd give me time to cool off, but we should talk tomorrow about moving forward professionally. After he left, I sat in my empty living room surrounded by our shared setup, feeling that specific exhaustion that comes after releasing months of built-up resentment, and decided to just sleep off the migraine and deal with everything in the morning. I took 3 ibuprofen, turned off all the equipment including that still recording camera, and crashed on my bed without even changing clothes. The last thing I remember thinking was that maybe this fight was actually good for us, Maybe we needed to air out these issues to build something better. I woke up at 7 that evening to my phone vibrating non-stop, the screen lighting up with notification after notification, until the battery warning popped up. My Discord was showing over 300 mentions, my Instagram had dozens of DM requests, and my subscriber count on YouTube had dropped by 12,000 in the span of 4 hours. The first message I actually read was from my sister in Michigan, asking if I was okay and saying she couldn't believe what she'd just watched, that she never knew I had such anger issues. My stomach turned into a block of ice as I opened YouTube with trembling fingers, and there it was, a video titled "I Can't Stay Silent Anymore" on Ethan's personal channel, posted 5 hours ago with already 200,000 views. The thumbnail showed me mid-rant, face twisted in anger, with Ethan cowering in the corner, and the title had a black and white filter that made everything look like surveillance footage from a true crime documentary. The video was 23 minutes of carefully edited footage that turned me into a monster I didn't recognize. Every calm moment had been cut out, every one of Ethan's provocations erased, leaving only my escalating voice and aggressive gestures spliced together into a highlight reel of rage. He'd added subtitles to parts where my voice was unclear, but the words were wrong. Where I'd said, "You never listen to my input," the subtitle read, "You never listen, you input nothing." The microphone throw was edited with a slow-motion replay, and a red circle highlighting how close it supposedly came to his head, complete with a dramatic pause and black screen that said, "I genuinely thought he might hurt me." Between clips of my outburst, Ethan had inserted footage of himself sitting in his car afterward, tears streaming down his face as he explained how he'd been enduring this behavior for months, how he'd been scared to speak up because I controlled the channel's main accounts and most of the equipment. He claimed I'd threatened to delete everything if he ever tried to leave, something I had never said or even thought, but he delivered it with such raw emotion that even I almost believed it for a second. The comments section was a public execution, thousands of people calling for my cancellation, dissecting my body language, diagnosing me with various personality disorders, and praising Ethan for his bravery in sharing his truth. Former fans were apologizing for supporting me, saying they'd always sensed something dark beneath my online persona, and other content creators were quote tweeting the video with statements about standing against abuse in the creator community. Someone had already made a compilation video titled "Red Flags We Missed" that analyzed our old content for signs of my supposed abusive behavior, pointing out every time I'd interrupted Ethan or disagreed with him as evidence of a controlling pattern. My Twitter was flooded with people posting screenshots of the worst frames from the video, my face contorted mid-sentence, my hand raised while gesticulating, all stripped of context and shared with captions about toxic masculinity and creator accountability. The gaming sponsors who'd been courting us had already posted statements distancing themselves from me, and 2 of them specifically mentioned increasing their support for Ethan's solo work to help him through this difficult time. I tried to access our shared YouTube account to post a response, or at least take down the collaborative videos until I could figure out what was happening, but my password didn't work anymore. The recovery email had been changed to something I didn't recognize, and when I checked the channel page, my name had been removed from all the descriptions and credits, replaced with "former co-host" in tiny text at the bottom. My own personal channel, which I'd barely touched since we started working together, was hemorrhaging subscribers by the minute, dropping from 30,000 to 18,000, while I watched the numbers tick down in real time. I called Ethan 17 times, left voicemails begging him to explain what was happening, why he'd done this, but he never picked up, and eventually my calls went straight to a message saying the number was no longer in service. Tried reaching out to mutual friends, other creators we'd collaborated with, but everyone either ignored me or sent brief messages saying they couldn't associate with me anymore given the circumstances. One person, a streamer named Vanessa, who'd been on our podcast twice, actually told me she'd suspected something was wrong when she noticed how I dominated conversations and cut Ethan off during recordings. The most devastating part was discovering that the video had been uploaded from my own account, not our shared channel, not Ethan's personal one, but my individual creator account that I'd forgotten even had upload access to our main content. When I finally managed to get into my email through password recovery, I found the scheduled upload sitting there in my YouTube studio, set for posting at 2 p.m. that day, which meant it had been configured while I was passed out from the migraine medication. The metadata showed it had been scheduled 3 weeks ago, on a day when Ethan had borrowed my laptop to check analytics, while his was supposedly getting repaired. Digging deeper into my email history, I found drafts of responses to sponsors that I'd never written, all declining partnerships and recommending they work with Ethan instead, dated months back but never sent, like evidence being planted for a crime that hadn't been committed yet. There were even rough cuts of the confession video in my Google Drive, multiple versions with different edits, testing which combination of clips would look the most damaging, all uploaded systematically over the course of 2 months from IP addresses that traced back to various coffee shops near Ethan's parents' house. I spent the next 72 hours trying to salvage something from the wreckage, recording a response video where I showed the unedited footage from that day, highlighting everything Ethan had cut out and manipulated. But it was useless because the original narrative had already cemented itself as truth in everyone's minds, and my video looked exactly like what guilty people do, desperately trying to reframe evidence, making excuses, playing the victim when caught. The few comments that weren't pure hatred accused me of deep-faking the footage or manipulating timestamps, and someone even started a theory that I'd forced Ethan to act provocative in the original recording to have something to point to later as justification. Every piece of evidence I presented was twisted into proof of my guilt. The scheduled upload from my account meant I'd been careless with security because I didn't value the partnership. The edited drafts in my drive were obviously my own practice runs that Ethan had discovered and exposed, and my emotional response videos were textbook examples of an abuser having a narcissistic meltdown when faced with accountability. My parents called from Florida, confused and hurt, asking why I hadn't told them I was struggling with anger management, and my mom mentioned she'd already reached out to Ethan to apologize for whatever pain I'd caused him. Within a week, Ethan had gained 200,000 new subscribers from the drama, launched a solo channel with massive support, and secured 3 major sponsorship deals from companies wanting to support his fresh start and healing journey. He posted updates about attending therapy to process the trauma, shared resources about recognizing toxic relationships, and even started a Discord server for other creators dealing with abusive partnerships, positioning himself as an advocate and survivor. Meanwhile, I was completely blacklisted from the gaming community, lost my apartment because I couldn't make rent without the channel income, and had to move back with my parents while figuring out how to rebuild a life outside the only career I'd known for 3 years. The final twist came when I found an old external hard drive while packing, and discovered Ethan had been recording our private conversations for over a year. Hundreds of hours of audio where he'd deliberately provoke arguments, then delete his antagonistic parts, building a library of out-of-context reactions for future use. But sharing that evidence would look like desperate retaliation from someone who couldn't accept responsibility. So it sits in a folder on my desktop, opened and closed a dozen times each day, a reminder that sometimes the truth doesn't matter when the lie gets there first. My roommate Jenna and I had been best friends since our freshman year at Colorado State, and by 26, I thought I knew everything about her. We'd moved to Denver together after graduation, survived terrible jobs, worse boyfriends, and that one year we lived above a couple who fought every single night until 3 in the morning. August was always our favorite month because the city finally cooled down enough to eat outside without sweating through our clothes, and we had this ritual of trying a new restaurant every weekend. I worked at a marketing firm downtown, one of those glass buildings where everyone wore blazers and pretended to care about metrics. But the pay was decent, and I'd just gotten promoted to senior account manager. Jenna was a graphic designer at a startup that made meditation apps, which meant she worked from home most days and had way too much time to scroll through social media between projects. The honesty challenge found us the way most terrible ideas do these days, through a perfectly edited video with upbeat music and beautiful people crying happy tears. Jenna sent it to me on a Wednesday morning with about 15 exclamation points and the prayer hands emoji, which was her way of saying she'd already decided we were doing it. The premise was deceptively simple. Two friends would take turns posting truths about each other for 7 days, showing the world what real friendship looked like when you stripped away all the filters and fake positivity. The videos we watched showed friends revealing sweet secrets, like how one secretly paid for the other's groceries during a rough patch, or how someone conquered their fear of flying to be at their friend's wedding. The comment sections were flooded with hearts and people tagging their own best friends, calling it the most wholesome trend of the year. I should have paid attention to the way Jenna's eyes lit up when she explained the rules to me over lunch at this Greek place we loved on Larimer Street. She kept talking about how brave these people were, how authentic, how the challenge was exposing the fake corporate culture of social media and replacing it with real human connection. Her salad sat untouched while she scrolled through example after example, showing me posts that had gone viral, pointing out how the revealing friend always got more engagement than the one being revealed about. She already had our first post planned out in her head. She'd start by sharing how I'd helped her through her eating disorder in college, something she'd never told anyone publicly, and I could share about the time she drove 8 hours straight to pick me up from that disastrous spring break trip in 2018. It all sounded so meaningful, so deep, the kind of content that would make people believe friendship could save the world. We started that same afternoon, and the first 3 days were exactly what we'd expected. Jenna posted about my secret volunteer work at the animal shelter, how I spent every Saturday morning cleaning kennels, but never told anyone because I didn't want to seem like I was bragging. I shared about her anonymous donations to the food bank, how she'd been giving 20% of her freelance income for 2 years straight. The likes poured in. Friends from college reached out saying how inspiring we were, and even some influencers started following our accounts. My mom called to say how proud she was that I'd found such a wonderful friend, and Jenna's posts were getting thousands of views on her stories. We were riding this high of digital validation, convinced we were pioneering a new kind of online authenticity. Too drunk on the numbers to notice how Jenna's smile had started to change whenever she looked at her phone. Day 4 was when everything shifted, though I didn't recognize it as a betrayal until it was too late. I woke up to my phone buzzing non-stop, which wasn't unusual since the challenge started. But the messages were different this time. Instead of hearts and cheerful comments, I was getting DMs asking if I was okay, if I needed to talk, if what Jenna posted was really true. My stomach turned to concrete as I opened Instagram and saw her latest post, a carousel of photos from college with a lengthy caption about how I'd slept with her crush senior year, knowing full well how she felt about him, and had hidden it for months until she found out from his roommate. The way she wrote it made me sound calculating, manipulative, like I'd orchestrated some elaborate betrayal when the reality was so much more complicated. He'd pursued me, I was drunk at a party, and I'd told her the very next day, sobbing with guilt. But those details weren't in her version. Her version had already been shared over 3,000 times. I called her immediately, my voice shaking as I asked what she was thinking, why she would twist something we'd worked through years ago into this public humiliation. She answered on the first ring, and her voice was sweeter than honey, like she was talking to a child who didn't understand basic math. She reminded me that the challenge was about honesty, about showing people that real friendships could survive anything, even the ugly parts. When I pointed out that she deliberately left out crucial context, she laughed and said context was subjective, that this was her truth, and wasn't that what authenticity meant. The comments were already flooding in, people calling me a backstabber, a fake friend, saying Jenna deserved better. Some girl from our college who I hadn't spoken to in 4 years made a TikTok about it, adding her own embellishments about other things I'd supposedly done, and suddenly I was watching my reputation dissolve in real time while Jenna's follower count climbed past 10,000. Day 5 brought something worse than gossip from college. Jenna posted screenshots of texts I'd sent her about my boss during a mental breakdown 3 months earlier. I'd been working 60-hour weeks, completely overwhelmed, and had vented to her in what I thought was confidence about how incompetent I thought my manager was, how the whole company was built on nepotism, how I fantasized about sending a company-wide email exposing everyone's salaries and watching the place burn. They were the kind of unhinged messages you send to your best friend at 2 in the morning when you're running on no sleep and too much coffee. The ones that you both understand aren't meant literally. But stripped of that context, presented as proof of my toxic workplace behavior, they looked absolutely damning. She'd even tagged my company's official Instagram account, and within an hour, HR had called me into a meeting where they placed me on administrative leave pending an investigation. The comments under that post were even more vicious than before. People were dissecting my character, calling me entitled, saying I was the type of person who blamed everyone else for my problems. Someone found my LinkedIn and started messaging my professional contacts with screenshots. My coworkers, who had been congratulating me on my promotion just weeks before, were now distancing themselves, and I could see them viewing my Instagram stories without responding to my texts. But what really made me sick was Jenna's response video to all the support she was getting, tears streaming down her face as she talked about how hard it was to be honest about someone you loved, how the challenge had opened her eyes to toxic patterns she'd been enabling for years. She was getting interview requests from podcasts about friendship and boundaries, and brands were reaching out for partnerships. She was monetizing my destruction, and when I tried to defend myself in my own post, explaining the real context, people accused me of gaslighting her and trying to silence her truth. Day 6 nearly broke me completely when I woke up to find she'd posted about my abortion from 2 years ago, something exactly 3 people in the world knew about. She'd framed it as concern for my mental health, writing this long caption about how she'd supported me through the trauma, but worried about my refusal to process it properly, how I'd been self-medicating with wine and casual sex ever since. None of that was true. I'd gone to therapy, I'd processed it in my own way, and my dating life was nobody's business but mine. But she'd included just enough real details: the clinic's location, the date, the fact that I'd eaten nothing but strawberry ice cream for a week afterward, that everyone knew it was authentic. My phone started ringing with calls from my Catholic mother, who I'd never told because I knew it would destroy our relationship. My dad texted asking if I was really his daughter anymore. My younger sister blocked me on everything without a word, and I could see from mutual friends' stories that she was crying at family dinner while everyone comforted her about having such a disappointing sibling. I drove to Jenna's apartment that evening, my whole body trembling with rage and devastation. When she opened the door, she was filming herself, talking to her phone about how she was about to have a difficult conversation with someone she loved who was struggling to accept accountability. She had this serene expression, like some wellness guru about to dispense life-changing wisdom, and she gestured for me to come in without ever putting the phone down. Her apartment was different. New furniture, fresh flowers everywhere, packages from brands stacked by the door. She'd transformed her space and her entire persona in less than a week, feeding off my humiliation like some kind of digital parasite. When I demanded she stop, told her she was destroying my life, she tilted her head and spoke in that same honeyed voice she'd been using all week. She said the internet just loved authenticity, that people were connecting with our story because it was real, that I should be grateful we were starting important conversations about female friendship and accountability. I begged her, actually got on my knees in her living room while she kept filming, tears streaming down my face as I asked her to stop, to remember who we used to be to each other. She zoomed in on my face, narrating to her audience about how toxic people often broke down when confronted with their patterns, how this was exactly the reaction she'd expected based on the research she'd been doing about narcissistic friendship dynamics. That's when I noticed the books on her coffee table, all self-help titles about surviving toxic friendships, setting boundaries, recognizing emotional manipulation. She'd been planning this, studying for it like it was some twisted final exam where my devastation was the passing grade. When I stood up to leave, she grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to hurt but firm enough to make me pause, and whispered that tomorrow's post would be the finale, the one that would really show people who I was. Her breath smelled like peppermint tea and victory, and behind her I could see her laptop open to a spreadsheet tracking engagement rates, brand deal proposals, and something labeled Phase 2 that made my chest tighten with dread. Day 7 never came, at least not the way she planned it. I spent that night in my car outside her building, refreshing her profile every few minutes, waiting for whatever killing blow she'd prepared. But at 3 a.m, her account vanished completely. Not deactivated, not private, gone like it had never existed. The hashtags we'd been using led nowhere. All her posts about me disappeared, and the thousands of people who'd been following our tragedy suddenly had nothing to watch. I found out later from a mutual friend that someone had reported her account for harassment, and somehow it had actually worked, though Jenna insisted she deleted it herself because the challenge had run its course. She moved out of her apartment 2 weeks later, took a job in Austin doing social media for some wellness startup that had discovered her during the whole ordeal. She left me with no job, a shattered family, and a reputation so thoroughly destroyed that I had to legally change my name and move to a different state just to get a fresh start. Sometimes I still get messages from strangers who remember the story, asking if I ever learned my lesson, if I ever took accountability for what I'd done to such a good friend. The truth doesn't matter anymore. The internet already decided who was the villain and who was the victim, and that verdict lives forever in screenshots and memories, even if the original evidence is gone. The excavators arrived at Millbrook Bridge on a Thursday, their yellow metal arms gleaming against the gray November sky. I watched them from my car, parked across the street from where the old iron structure had stood abandoned since 2004, its rusted beams like broken bones jutting from the riverbank. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for 3 days, always the same unknown number, always the same message. You promised you'd keep quiet. 20 years of silence, 20 years of pretending Christopher Brennan slipped and fell that night, and now someone knew the truth. The construction crew started setting up their equipment, preparing to dig deep into the riverbed to remove the old foundations, and I wondered if they'd find something down there, something we'd missed in the dark while the rain poured down and washed away most of the evidence. My throat felt like sandpaper as I watched them mark the excavation zones with orange spray paint, each X bringing them closer to the exact spot where everything went wrong. Aaron Fitzgerald's pickup truck pulled up behind mine before I could leave. That same dark blue Ford he'd been driving since high school, now spotted with rust around the wheel wells. We hadn't spoken since that night in 2004, hadn't even made eye contact at the grocery store or the gas station during the rare times we'd crossed paths in our small Illinois town. But here he was, and I knew he'd been getting the messages too because his face had that same hollow look mine had in the mirror this morning, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that used to make us whole. He got out slowly, favoring his left leg from that old football injury, and walked to my passenger door without saying a word. When he climbed in, the smell of cigarettes and motor oil filled my car, and for a second we were 18 again, sitting in this same spot the night Christopher died, trying to figure out what to do while his body floated face down in the dark water below. "They're going to find it," Aaron said, his voice rougher than I remembered, like he'd been gargling gravel for 2 decades. His hands gripped his knees, knuckles white, and I noticed the wedding ring he wore now, a simple gold band that caught the weak sunlight filtering through my windshield. Whatever we thought got washed away that night, Brian, they're going to find it when they start digging. The current wasn't as strong as we thought down by the foundation pillars. Things get trapped there, stuck in the mud and the rocks. He pulled out his phone and showed me his screen. Dozens of the same message from different numbers, all saying variations of the same thing. You promised, you lied, you killed him. Someone had been watching us, maybe all these years, maybe just recently when the demolition was announced. But either way, they knew what we'd done, and they were getting louder about it. The foreman was shouting orders now, pointing at different sections of the bridge while his crew nodded and took notes on their clipboards. They'd cordoned off a 100-foot radius around the structure, yellow tape fluttering like party streamers in the wind. Aaron and I sat there watching, neither of us mentioning what we both remembered. Christopher hadn't wanted to go to the bridge that night, had only come because we'd pressured him, called him names, said he was weak for being scared of heights. We were drunk on stolen whiskey from Aaron's dad's cabinet, feeling invincible the way only teenage boys can feel, when we decided to play that stupid game. Truth or dare on a bridge at midnight in the rain. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. Everything could go wrong when you're 18 and angry, and someone says the wrong thing about the wrong girl at the wrong moment. Her name was Melissa Vance, and she was dating Christopher even though Aaron had been in love with her since freshman year. That night on the bridge, the whiskey made Aaron mean, made him say things about how Christopher didn't deserve her, how he'd seen Melissa kissing someone else at a party the weekend before. It was a lie, just Aaron being cruel because he couldn't stand watching them together anymore, but Christopher believed it. His face went from confused to hurt to furious in the span of 3 seconds, and then he was swinging at Aaron, both of them stumbling on the wet metal grating of the old pedestrian walkway. I tried to break them up, grabbed Christopher's arm just as he lunged forward again, and that's when everything shifted. His feet slipped on the slick surface, his weight pulling him toward the railing, and Aaron grabbed his jacket trying to steady him. But the fabric was soaked, slippery, and Christopher's momentum was already carrying him backward. The railing on the Millbrook Bridge was only 3 feet high, built in 1952 when safety standards were different, when people were more careful, or maybe just more accepting of danger. Christopher hit it at hip level, his upper body tilting back over the edge while Aaron still held his jacket. And for one terrible second, we all stood frozen in this impossible tableau. Aaron could have pulled harder, could have yanked him forward to safety, and I could have grabbed Christopher's legs, could have anchored him somehow. But we didn't. We just stood there for that eternal second, looking into Christopher's eyes as he realized what was about to happen. And then Aaron's grip loosened, just slightly, just enough. It wasn't murder, not exactly. But it wasn't an accident either. It was something in between, something there's no good word for, something that 2 18-year-old boys would carry for the rest of their lives. Christopher fell backward into the black water 40 feet below, his arms windmilling through the air, never making a sound. The splash was smaller than you'd expect, swallowed immediately by the rain and the river's current. Aaron and I stood at the railing, staring down at the darkness, waiting for him to surface, telling ourselves he'd pop up any second, gasping and cursing and swimming for shore. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and we were scrambling down the muddy embankment, slipping and sliding, tearing our hands on rocks and branches. We found him caught against a concrete support pillar, face down, his jacket snagged on a piece of rebar sticking out from the crumbling foundation. The water was only chest deep there, but it had been enough. We pulled him out, tried CPR even though we barely knew how, pushed on his chest and breathed into his lungs until we were both sobbing and exhausted. But Christopher was gone, had probably been gone from the moment he hit the water, and we were left with a body and a choice. The story we told was simple and believable. 3 drunk teenagers on a bridge. Christopher slipped. We tried to save him but couldn't. We were careful about the details, made sure our accounts matched without sounding rehearsed. Aaron had a bruise on his cheek from the fight, but we said it happened when we were trying to pull Christopher from the water, that I'd accidentally elbowed him in the panic. The police believed us, everyone believed us, because why wouldn't they? We were good kids from decent families, honor roll students headed to college in the fall. Christopher's parents held us while they cried, thanked us for trying to save their son, and that almost broke me completely. Melissa never spoke to either of us again, moved away 2 weeks after the funeral, and I heard she became a nurse somewhere in California. Aaron and I stopped being friends without ever discussing it, like magnets that suddenly repelled each other. because looking at each other meant remembering that second when we chose to let go. Someone was there that night, Aaron said suddenly, pulling me back to the present. He showed me another message on his phone, this one different from the others. A photo, grainy and dark, but unmistakable. It was us on the bridge, Aaron holding Christopher's jacket, me standing frozen beside them, and you could see it all. The angle of Christopher's body, the way we weren't really trying to save him. This came through an hour ago. They want $50,000 or they're sending it to the police and Christopher's parents. His voice cracked on the last word, and I realized he probably had kids now. A whole life built on top of this secret. The construction crew was unloading an excavator from a flatbed truck, its metal tracks clanking against the pavement. In a few hours, they'd start tearing into the earth around the bridge's foundation, and I wondered what else might be down there besides mud and rocks. I pulled out my own phone and scrolled through the messages I'd been ignoring all week. Between the repeated warnings about keeping quiet, there was one that made my chest tighten. Check the news from December 2003. I searched for it while Aaron watched, both of us breathing too loud in the confined space of my car. There it was, a small article about a Roosevelt High student named Matthew Garrison who'd gone missing 3 weeks before Christmas. He was 16, a sophomore, and the last place anyone saw him was near the Millbrook Bridge. The case went cold. Everyone assumed he'd run away, but the timing was wrong, all wrong. Matthew Garrison had been Melissa's younger brother, something I'd completely forgotten until I saw his school photo staring back at me from my phone screen. Those same green eyes Melissa had, that same stubborn chin, and suddenly the messages made a different kind of sense. Aaron saw it too, the connection forming in his mind like a photograph developing in slow motion. Matthew was asking questions, he whispered, and the memory hit us both at once. That December, before he disappeared, Matthew had been coming around, asking about his sister's ex-boyfriend, about what really happened on the bridge. He was just a kid, but he was smart, too smart, and he'd noticed things that didn't add up in our story. The way Aaron's bruise was on the wrong side of his face for someone who'd fallen while pulling a body from the river. The way neither of us had any injuries on our hands, despite claiming we'd climbed down sharp rocks in the dark. The way we'd been completely dry when we'd flagged down a passing car for help, even though we'd supposedly just pulled Christopher from the water. Matthew had been putting it together, piece by piece, and then he'd vanished. We'd been relieved when he disappeared, genuinely relieved, and that should have been our first warning that we'd become different people than who we'd started as. "We need to go to the police," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew we wouldn't. Too much time had passed, too many lies had been told, and now there was Matthew to think about. Aaron was already shaking his head, his breathing getting shallow and quick the way it used to before football games when he was nervous. The excavator was moving toward the bridge now, its operator adjusting levers inside the glass cab, preparing to bite into 20 years of secrets. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a video, just 3 seconds long but enough to change everything. It showed someone climbing out from under the bridge that December night in 2003, their clothes covered in mud and something darker. The person turned toward the camera for just a moment, and even though the face was partially obscured, the Roosevelt High Letterman jacket was clear as day. It was mine, the one I'd reported stolen from my car that same week. Matthew disappeared. Aaron grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, his eyes wild and unfocused. "That's not possible," he said. But we both knew it was. The jacket, the timing, the way Matthew had simply vanished without a trace. One of us had done something that night, something worse than letting Christopher fall. And the truly terrifying part was that I couldn't remember which one. Those weeks after Christopher's death were a blur of guilt and alcohol, of blackouts and lost time, of waking up in strange places with dirt under my fingernails. Aaron had been the same way, self-destructing in slow motion, and either one of us could have encountered Matthew by the bridge, could have panicked when he confronted us with what he knew, could have done something irreversible, and then buried it so deep in our minds that even we didn't know the truth anymore. The excavator's bucket bit into the earth with a grinding screech, and Aaron and I both flinched like we'd been shot. The foreman was walking toward us now, probably to tell us to move our vehicles, and that's when I saw her. Melissa Vance stood on the other side of the construction zone. Older now, but unmistakable. Those green eyes still sharp as broken glass. She was holding a phone, recording everything. And when she saw us looking, she smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind that promised retribution 20 years in the making. She must have been the one sending the messages, the one with the photos and videos, the one who'd been waiting all this time for the bridge to finally give up its secrets. Aaron was already starting his truck, ready to run like we'd run that night, but I stayed frozen in my seat. Because I remembered something else now, something that explained everything. Melissa hadn't moved to California to become a nurse. She'd moved to study forensic science, and she'd come back to Riverside 3 months ago, right when they'd announced the bridge demolition. She'd been planning this, orchestrating it, making sure we'd both be here when they started digging. And as the excavator pulled up the first scoop of dark river mud, I saw something wrapped in plastic sheeting, something that had been waiting down there for 2 decades, and I knew our time for running was over. The construction crew stopped immediately when they saw what the excavator had uncovered. Within an hour, the whole area was wrapped in police tape, detectives everywhere, and Aaron and I were sitting in separate patrol cars. But here's the thing that still haunts me, the detail that changed everything. When they unwrapped that plastic sheeting, it wasn't Matthew Garrison inside. It was a collection of items: Matthew's wallet, his watch, some clothes, and a recorded confession on an old cassette tape, all carefully preserved. On that tape was Matthew's voice, young and shaking but determined, explaining how he'd figured out what we'd done to Christopher. How he'd confronted us separately, recorded our drunken admissions without us knowing. How he'd been planning to take it to the police but wanted to give us one chance to come forward ourselves. The tape cut off mid-sentence, like something had happened during the recording, but Matthew hadn't died that night. Melissa told the police everything as they arrested us. Her brother had been so traumatized by what he'd learned, by the threat Aaron had made when confronted, that he'd attempted suicide. She'd found him in time, barely, and their family had sent him to a psychiatric facility in California under a false name to protect him from us. Matthew was alive, living in San Francisco now as Michael Vance, working as a counselor for troubled teens. He'd buried that package under the bridge as insurance before confronting us, knowing that someday the truth would need to come out. Melissa had been protecting him all these years, helping him build a new life while she studied forensic science and waited for the perfect moment. She'd known about the planned demolition for over a year, had orchestrated the messages to draw us here, made sure we'd both be watching when the evidence surfaced. Aaron broke down completely when they played the tape at the station, confessing to everything, including how he'd threatened to hurt Matthew the same way Christopher had hurt himself if the kid ever spoke up. I remembered none of it, the alcohol having wiped those nights clean from my memory. But it didn't matter. The recording had captured enough, and combined with the photo Melissa had somehow retrieved from an old traffic camera archive, it was over. We were charged with manslaughter for Christopher and attempted witness intimidation for Matthew. Aaron got 12 years, I got 8, and Melissa watched from the gallery as they led us away. The bridge is gone now, demolished completely, but I can still see it every time I close my eyes. I can still feel that moment when we could have pulled Christopher back and chose not to. And I know that somewhere in California, Matthew Garrison is finally free of the secret that almost destroyed him, while Aaron and I are exactly where we deserve to be. Finding Bradley through that roommate app felt like winning a small lottery. The guy was quiet, paid his share of the Phoenix apartment 3 days early every month, and had already furnished the place with leather couches and a TV setup that probably cost more than I made in 2 months teaching 7th grade. 26 and still paying off student loans, I couldn't exactly be picky about roommates, but Bradley exceeded every expectation. He worked IT support for some financial company downtown, kept vampire hours that meant we barely crossed paths, and had this whole smart home system rigged up. Lights you could control with your voice, a thermostat that learned your schedule, even a refrigerator that could tell you when the milk was going bad. The apartment itself sat on the 7th floor of one of those new buildings with a gym nobody uses and a rooftop pool that was always too crowded. Bradley had been there 8 months before me, had the bigger bedroom with the bathroom attached, but charged me way less than half the rent because he said he valued stability over money. The camera showed up in May, maybe 10 weeks after I'd moved in, mounted right where the living room met the hallway to our bedrooms. Bradley brought it home in an Amazon box on a Tuesday, spent an hour installing it while I graded papers at the kitchen counter. He explained that 3 units in the building next door had been hit by break-ins. Someone was apparently following delivery trucks and grabbing packages, then coming back later for bigger hauls. The camera was small, black, about the size of a golf ball with a subtle red light that pulsed every few seconds like a tiny heartbeat. Bradley showed me how it covered the front door, the kitchen entrance, most of the living room. Said his computer equipment alone was worth more than my car, couldn't be too careful. He even downloaded the app on my phone right there, typed in the password himself, showed me how to check the live feed and review recordings from the past week. I remember joking that now I'd have proof when I sleepwalked to the kitchen for midnight snacks, and he laughed. But it was this weird, short laugh that ended too quickly. For weeks, everything felt normal. I'd wave at the camera when I came home from school. Sometimes Bradley would text me screenshots when Amazon delivered my packages, proving the system worked. But then I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. The camera's angle seemed different some mornings, like someone had nudged it during the night. Bradley said the mount was loose, he'd fix it eventually, but it kept happening. Then there were the times I'd check the app and find gaps in the recordings. 20 minutes here, an hour there, always late at night or early morning. Bradley blamed it on Wi-Fi issues, said the building's internet was garbage between 2 and 6 a.m. when they did maintenance on the servers. I wanted to believe him because what was the alternative? That my roommate was manually deleting footage? Why would anyone do that? He had access to the whole apartment anyway, could walk into the living room whenever he wanted. The real weirdness started on a Saturday in early July. I'd gone out with some teacher friends for drinks. Came home around midnight expecting Bradley to be gaming with his headset on like every weekend. But the apartment was dark, silent, his door closed with no light underneath. I grabbed water from the kitchen, headed down the hallway to my room, and that's when I noticed it. The camera had been moved, not just adjusted, but completely repositioned. Instead of facing the living room and front door, it was angled down the hallway, pointing directly at my bedroom door. My stomach felt like someone had filled it with ice water. I stood there in the dark, staring at that little red light blinking at me, recording me, and realized it could see straight into my room whenever I opened the door. The angle was perfect, deliberate, showing not just the doorway but deep into my personal space where my bed and closet were visible. I didn't sleep that night, kept my door locked, pushed my dresser against it, and sat on my bed with my laptop researching tenant laws and security camera regulations in Arizona. Every few minutes I'd hear something. The floor creaking, the ice maker, normal apartment sounds that now felt sinister. Around 3 a.m., I opened the app to check the feed, and there was Bradley in the hallway, standing perfectly still in front of my door. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there in basketball shorts and a white undershirt, facing my door like he was listening. The timestamp showed he'd been there for 12 minutes. I held my breath, watching him through the screen, watching him stand outside my actual door just 8 feet away. Then he turned, looked directly at the camera, directly at me watching him, and smiled before walking back to his room. Not a normal smile, but this slow, knowing expression like we were sharing a secret. My whole body felt electric with fear, like touching a live wire. Sunday morning, I confronted him in the kitchen while he made his protein shake. Tried to keep my voice steady, asked why the camera was pointing at my door. Bradley didn't even look up from the blender, just said he'd noticed someone trying doorknobs in the hallway on Friday night, wanted to capture any suspicious activity near our actual rooms. When I mentioned seeing him outside my door at 3 a.m., his whole demeanor changed. He turned to face me, still holding the blender pitcher, and asked how I knew that. I said I'd checked the app, and he tilted his head like a confused dog, said there shouldn't be any footage from last night. The system had crashed around 11 p.m. He'd have to call tech support Monday. But I had the screenshot on my phone, showed it to him right there, his face clear as day in the hallway. Bradley looked at the image for a long moment, then laughed and said I must have doctored it somehow, that he'd been asleep by 10, had a marathon training run in the morning. The way he lied, so smooth and confident while looking right at me, made me realize this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. That afternoon, while Bradley was out on his supposed training run, I did something I'd never imagined myself doing. I broke into his room. His door was locked, but I'd learned to jimmy interior locks from my college roommate who constantly forgot her keys. His room was disturbingly neat, bed made with military corners, not a single piece of clothing on the floor. His desk had 3 monitors arranged in a semicircle, and underneath sat a black tower computer with blue LED lights pulsing through the vents. But what caught my attention was the external hard drive next to his keyboard, labeled with one of those label maker strips. The label just had initials. KM. My initials, Kayla Monroe. My mouth went completely dry. I plugged the drive into his computer, which was still logged in, and found dozens of folders organized by date. Each folder contained hours of footage, but not from the living room camera angle I knew about. These were from a different camera, one that showed the inside of my bedroom. The earliest files dated back to my first week in the apartment, 2 months before he'd installed the security camera in the living room. I clicked through the videos with trembling fingers, seeing myself getting dressed, sleeping, having private phone conversations with my mom, even intimate moments I thought were completely private. There was footage of me crying after a bad day at work, dancing alone to music while cleaning, changing clothes after my morning runs. He'd captured everything, organized it meticulously, even had subfolders labeled morning routine, phone calls, and worst of all, sleeping. The sleeping folder had hundreds of clips, some showing him entering my room while I was unconscious, standing at the foot of my bed, sometimes for 20 or 30 minutes according to the timestamps. In one video from just 3 nights ago, he reached out and touched my hair while I slept, smoothing it away from my face with this tender, sick gesture that made bile rise in my throat. I grabbed the hard drive, took photos of everything with my phone, and ran back to my room to pack. I needed to get out immediately, call the police from somewhere safe, somewhere he couldn't watch me anymore. I threw clothes into my gym bag, grabbed my laptop and important documents, but as I reached for my bedroom door, I heard the front door open. Bradley was back early. His footsteps came down the hallway, stopped right outside my room. He knocked twice, soft and polite like always, and called out that he'd bought Thai food from my favorite place, extra spring rolls. Wanted to apologize for being weird earlier about the camera thing. His voice sounded so normal, friendly even, like we were still just roommates having a minor disagreement. I stayed silent, holding the hard drive against my chest, barely breathing. He knocked again, tried the doorknob, found it locked. Then his voice changed, dropped lower, and he said he knew I'd been in his room, that his computer sent alerts to his phone whenever someone accessed certain files. He knew exactly what I'd seen, what I'd taken, and suggested we talk about it like adults before I did something we'd both regret. The doorknob rattled harder, and I heard him doing something to the lock, probably picking it the same way I'd picked his. I did the only thing I could think of, climbed out my bedroom window onto the fire escape, 7 floors up, wearing socks on the metal grating, clutching my bag and that hard drive like my life depended on it. The Phoenix heat hit me like a wall, even though the sun was setting. Must have been over 90 degrees still. I could hear Bradley inside my room now, calling my name, checking the bathroom, the closet. I practically fell down those fire escape stairs, scraping my legs on the rusted edges. not caring about the noise I was making. When I hit the ground, I ran to my car barefoot, drove straight to a police station 6 miles away. The desk officer took one look at me, disheveled, bleeding from the scrapes, holding a hard drive like evidence in a murder case, and immediately called for a detective. I showed them everything on my phone, gave them the drive, filed a report for stalking, invasion of privacy, breaking and entering. They sent units to the apartment within the hour, but Bradley was already gone. His room was completely cleaned out, computer and all, like he'd been prepared to vanish at a moment's notice. The detective, a woman named Holloway with tired eyes and coffee stains on her sleeve, told me they'd found 2 more cameras in my room. One in the ceiling fan, another behind the air vent above my closet. Both were wireless, probably streaming to his computer the entire time I'd lived there. The landlord was horrified, gave me my deposit back immediately, even offered to pay for a hotel while I found a new place. Turns out Bradley wasn't even his real name. The ID he'd used for the lease was fake, sophisticated enough to pass a standard background check, but fell apart under police scrutiny. His fingerprints weren't in any database, and the financial company where he supposedly worked had never heard of him. The roommate app had already deleted his profile, probably part of his exit strategy. Holloway said guys like him were ghosts, could reinvent themselves in a new city within days, already hunting for the next victim. The thought that he was out there somewhere, maybe watching another woman right now, made me physically sick. It's been 4 months since that night, and I still can't shake certain habits. I check every corner of my new studio apartment for cameras, use a radio frequency detector I bought online, cover my laptop camera with tape even though I know it's paranoid. Sometimes I wake up at 3 a.m., convinced someone's standing in my room watching me sleep. The police never found Bradley or whatever his real name was. The hard drive had enough evidence to convict him of multiple felonies, but you can't prosecute a ghost. Holloway calls occasionally, tells me they're still looking, that these cases sometimes break years later when the perpetrator gets sloppy. But I know better. Somewhere out there, he's got a new name, a new roommate, probably calling himself something trustworthy like Tom or Richard, installing security cameras for safety. I started a blog about my experience, and 17 women have contacted me with similar stories. Roommates, landlords, even maintenance workers who installed hidden cameras. None of their stalkers were ever caught either. The only victory I have is that I got out, that I'm alive, that I trusted my instincts when everything felt wrong. Some nights, that's enough. Most nights, it's not even close. It had been years since I last saw Emily, but when she messaged me out of nowhere asking to meet, something in me said I owed her that much. We'd been inseparable in high school, the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences. Life had taken us in different directions, and truthfully, I thought she wanted to patch things up. Maybe talk about the time we'd stopped speaking for reasons neither of us ever explained. I drove 2 hours to her small town that morning, trying to shake the weird mix of nostalgia and dread I felt the closer I got to her house. The place looked smaller than I remembered. A faded blue 2-story home with paint peeling near the porch railings, wind chimes tinkling softly even though there was barely any breeze. She greeted me with a hug that felt practiced, like she had rehearsed it. Her smile was polite, too polished, and her eyes darted toward the hallway every few seconds. The air inside smelled faintly of bleach and old candles. Emily said she had just finished cleaning and apologized for the mess, though everything looked painfully organized. Books lined perfectly, framed photos evenly spaced, not a single cushion out of place. We sat on the couch with coffee she'd already prepared, but I noticed 2 cups waiting on the counter before I arrived, as if she had been expecting me exactly on time. We talked about our jobs, her new boyfriend, my move to the city, all small talk that felt like a script. At some point, she excused herself to grab something from her bedroom. I stayed in the living room, staring at a picture of us from senior year sitting on the mantel. The frame was spotless, but the photo inside looked slightly warped, like it had been exposed to heat. I followed her voice down the hall when she called me, saying she had found something funny from the old days. Her room was the same layout as before, posters replaced with minimalist art, same creaky wooden floor, same narrow window looking over the yard. That was when I saw it, a small box under her bed, wrapped in worn black fabric and secured with a heavy brass padlock. She noticed my eyes on it and laughed softly. "You remember this?" she asked, kneeling down and pulling it out like it was some harmless relic. The fabric fell away to reveal a wooden box covered in faint scratches, initials carved along the lid, ER and LC, our initials from high school. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen that thing since the night of the accident, the night we swore never to talk about again. Emily brushed the dust off with her palm, looked at me with a strange calm, and said, "I kept it all, just in case." She slid the key into the padlock and turned it with a faint click that echoed louder than it should have. Inside, everything was meticulously arranged. Envelopes tied with string, a few Polaroids, and folded letters written in blue ink. My name was on nearly every piece. She handed me one without saying anything, and when I opened it, I recognized my own handwriting. A confession I had written years ago after the hit and run, something she had convinced me to write to clear my conscience. I had thought she destroyed it. My hands trembled slightly as I read the lines aloud, and Emily just watched, her expression unreadable. I asked her why she still had it, but she only smiled faintly and said, "People forget what guilt looks like until they need proof." The words chilled me. There was no sign of remorse in her tone, no trace of the friend I used to know. I looked down at the letters again and noticed new additions. Photos of the victim's car, newspaper clippings about the police reopening the case, even an article with my old home address circled in red ink. Emily reached into the box again, pulling out another envelope I had never seen before. "They're asking questions again," she said, so I figured I should be ready. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I tried to reason with her, telling her this was insane, that keeping all of this could ruin both of us. She leaned back on her bed, crossing her arms, and said she had already told someone everything, just in case. I felt the blood rush to my ears, that strange ringing when you know something has already gone too far to fix. She said a detective had called her a few weeks ago, and she just answered honestly. I realized then that every single piece of evidence pointed toward me, and that she had built her story around protecting herself. When I left her house, the sky was darkening fast. My phone buzzed with a notification, a news alert mentioning the victim's family, saying the police had new leads and were seeking a former acquaintance of a woman connected to the case. I sat in my car outside her house, watching her silhouette through the window. She was standing still, curtains half drawn, phone pressed to her ear. And even though I couldn't hear her, I knew exactly who she was talking to. I drove straight to a motel on the outskirts of town, too afraid to go home. The sound of passing cars outside made my chest tighten. Every engine seemed to linger just a second too long. I laid everything she had given me on the small table. The letter, the photos, the article. It looked like a case file built against me. I kept thinking about her face when she said proof, how calm she looked, as if she had rehearsed this moment for years. I barely slept, staring at the door, waiting for headlights to flash across the curtains. The next morning, I called the detective whose name was in the article. I told him I wanted to give my side before anyone else twisted it. He agreed to meet that afternoon at the local station. During the interview, he mentioned Emily's statement before I could even bring her up. He said she had claimed I had been driving, that she was just a witness. Hearing her name from his mouth made my throat close. I told him everything, the promise we made, the fear, the panic that night. But it all sounded hollow now, rehearsed and desperate. When I got back to my car, there was an envelope tucked under the wiper. Inside was a single Polaroid from the box, one that showed me standing next to the dented car, staring down at the road. My handwriting was on the back, words I didn't remember writing. "We can't hide forever." I looked around the parking lot, half expecting to see her car somewhere nearby. The lot was empty. but a small camera above the station door blinked red. Someone had been watching. That night, I packed what little I had and drove until sunrise. I didn't go home, didn't call anyone. Weeks passed before I saw another update. The police had arrested someone, and her name was listed. Emily. They found her house ransacked, the box gone. The article said she had left town the same day I spoke to the detective. I never heard from her again, but sometimes I wake up at night certain I can hear the faint sound of wind chimes, like the ones on her porch, somewhere just outside my window. Cleaning my phone had become a weird kind of therapy. Whenever life felt cluttered, I'd scroll through old screenshots, random notes, and voicemails I had meant to delete months ago. That afternoon was quiet. The kind of silence that hums in the background when you're home alone for too long. My apartment smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee, and I was halfway through clearing the voice notes folder when I saw her name, Tara Mitchell. The file had no date, just a name I hadn't spoken aloud in over 2 years. Tara and I used to be inseparable. We met in college, shared everything from cheap takeout to late-night secrets. She was the type who never stopped talking, brilliant, unpredictable, and always a little too intense about everything she touched. But our friendship cracked fast. Small things at first. Rumors that I'd supposedly said something behind her back, missing documents from my job presentation, people suddenly pulling away from me without explanation. By the time I realized it all traced back to her, she had vanished from my life without a word. Seeing that voice note made my stomach clench. Not fear exactly, but the old familiar ache of unfinished business. I tapped play expecting maybe some apology, or even a drunk message she'd sent years ago. Instead, what came through the speaker was Tara's voice. Calm, composed, disturbingly deliberate. The kind of tone she used when she was planning something. "I think about you a lot," she began. Not in a sentimental way, more like an experiment. Her words spilled out in a steady rhythm, like she was reading from a script. She talked about testing boundaries, about seeing how much she could take from someone before they broke. Trust, respect, opportunities. "You were perfect for it," she said, her voice soft, almost affectionate. "So stable, so predictable. I wanted to see what happened when I pulled one thread at a time." I remember standing there, frozen in the middle of my kitchen, phone pressed against the counter, listening to the sound of someone I once called my best friend dismantle my life with surgical precision. She described everything with eerie precision. How she'd planted rumors, sent anonymous complaints to my boss, even how she'd used my login once to accidentally send a wrong file during a major pitch. I could hear the faint clicking of her keyboard in the background, like she was multitasking while confessing. "It was never personal," she said, almost casually. "I wanted to understand what it takes to unmake a person without touching them." The calmness in her voice was worse than anger. It sounded like someone describing a lab result. By the third minute, she started recalling moments I had forgotten. The morning I cried in the office restroom after losing a promotion. The night my boyfriend left because he couldn't deal with the drama. She whispered the details like secrets she had stolen, repeating phrases I had said during those moments, as if she had been hiding nearby, listening. "You thought people were just drifting away," she murmured, "but it was all me watching how you'd adapt." I remember gripping the edge of the counter, trying to convince myself it had to be fake, some cruel prank, or an audio she had made for someone else, but every word matched too perfectly. When she started laughing softly between sentences, I nearly dropped the phone. It was the same low, uneven laugh she used when something amused her too much to hide. "You always wanted to see the good in people," she said. "That's what made you interesting. I kept waiting for you to fight back, but you never did. You just kept trying to fix things." Then came a pause. 5 seconds of silence where all I could hear was the faint hum of her air conditioner. My pulse was pounding so hard it muffled everything else. I almost stopped the recording right there. But something in her tone shifted, like she was leaning closer to the microphone. "If you're hearing this," she whispered, "it means I finally won." The words slid out so quietly I barely caught them, followed by a soft click, the kind that happens when someone covers the mic with their hand. And then nothing, no background noise, no end chime. Just dead silence stretching out as I stood there in my kitchen, realizing I was holding proof that she had watched my life crumble piece by piece, and somehow thought it was a game. I replayed the ending over and over, trying to catch something I had missed. A background sound, a hidden message, anything that explained why she had sent it to me. But no matter how many times I listened, those final words stayed the same. "If you're hearing this, it means I finally won." It didn't sound like a taunt. It sounded like closure, like she had already written the last line of a story I never agreed to be in. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet, feeling the weight of every ruined friendship, every lost chance, realizing it all connected to her. Curiosity got the better of me. I searched her name online, scrolled through social media, even checked old mutual contacts. The last post under her profile was from 2 years ago, a black and white photo of a shoreline with the caption, "Every ending is a kind of victory." Her account had no recent activity, no tags, nothing. One of her old co-workers mentioned she had moved out of state not long after quitting her job. No one seemed to know where she went. That absence only made the message worse. If she was alive, she had gone silent. If she wasn't, then that recording was the last piece of her I would ever hear. That night I left my phone face down on the counter and couldn't bring myself to touch it again until morning. Every sound, the refrigerator hum, the pipes settling, felt sharper, heavier. I thought about deleting the file, but part of me needed to keep it, like proof that what happened to me wasn't just bad luck. The next day I transferred it to my laptop, hidden deep in a folder named Receipts, and told no one. I still work in the same apartment, same kitchen, same faint lemon smell, but I can't shake the sense that she expected me to find it, that maybe this was her final move. A week later, while scrolling through my new voice memos, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. A new file had appeared in the folder, time-stamped from the previous night, labeled only Untitled. I hadn't recorded anything. My phone was charging on the counter while I slept. When I pressed play, the sound was faint at first, just static and the soft click of someone breathing close to the mic. Then, a whisper, "You listened."